everybody, welcome back to the Bitcoin Layer, block height 806739. Today I have with me a very special guest from South Africa, Hermann Vivier, the founder of Bitcoin Ekasi. Hermann, welcome to the Bitcoin Layer.
How's it? Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Hermann, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I have been watching all that Bitcoin Ekasi has been doing in South Africa, looking through your videos. So yeah, this is very exciting for me, especially since we've been working on a Bitcoin circular economy, and that's all we're basically trying to accomplish. So maybe I can start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get up, getting the inspiration to start a Bitcoin circular economy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it was a long time coming. I've been obsessed with Bitcoin for a long time. I was introduced in 2013 by a friend of mine, and I don't know, something about it just made sense to me. I've always struggled with this idea of governance. It never quite made sense to me that you have some people governing over over others, because you're always going to sit with the problem of who governs the governing. So I think one of the things that really influenced me early on was Nelson Mandela's biography, and he opens with this story in his in the opening chapter. He talks about this idea of who polices the police. If the police are the ones breaking the rules, then who is it that's checking up on them? So I've been sort of thinking about that idea for a very long time, and when I came across Bitcoin, I just was like, oh shit, this is the first time I've ever seen something that there are no rulers. Everybody's on the same level. And, that just sort of made intuitive sense to me. So I kind of kept it to myself for a long time. And then after 7-8 years of just being obsessed with Bitcoin on my own in my own little bubble, I sort of thought, well, I want to do something more. I want to do something more to try and help, further the cause, because I believe it can change the world for the better. So, I don't code. I'm not a developer. So I figured when I saw what Bitcoin Beach was doing in El Salvador, I thought, well, that's something that I can do. I have an existing organization that we can use to start getting the circular economy going. That was in 2021. By that time, I'd been running this organization for almost 10 years, and we have kids coming, and we have coaches who coach the kids and so on. And so I figured, well, I can do the same thing that they did in El Salvador, in El Zonte. It's all the same building blocks are there. And so that those two kind of things sort of, just came together. And that's basically it.
If you love buying Bitcoin, just like I do, then River is your favorite place to buy it. Purchase Bitcoin with no fees when you dollar cost average, and know your assets are held in multi-sig cold storage with 100% full reserves. Plus, River has built their own infrastructure, so they don't rely on third-party custodians. There's a new standard in Bitcoin, and River is setting it. Get started at River by visiting river.com/TBL for $5 free when you purchase the first $100 in Bitcoin.
So you've talked really about who governs the police. Maybe if I can ask, I think I know a bit of the history of South Africa in terms of governance. And what are the impacts maybe you can say you've seen in South Africa as a result of, the government being the central body in determining the economy of the whole society? What are the things you see as a result of this in South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a very particular situation here which has informed my understanding of the world, obviously. And I was very enthusiastic when South Africa transitioned over to the democratic system. I was a sort of in my early teenage years when the first election happened in 1994. And growing up in early democratic South Africa, there was a lot of hope. It was quite a miraculous situation that the country did not descend into a civil war. That was always a real possibility that would happen. There was a lot of infighting within the ANC of who would get control. You know, would it be the Xhosa's, the Xhosa faction or the Zulu faction, the IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party or the ANC? So there was a lot of, you know, factions, a lot of tension between the different races. It was a very, very volatile situation. And when democracy happened relatively peacefully, it inspired the world with hope. It inspired South Africans with hope. And then sort of within one generation, that government has descended into just absolute corruption. Like it's actually quite sad to see how quickly sort of democracy failed in South Africa, because today you're sitting with a situation where the ruling party is almost completely corrupt. And there are corruptions at the highest level of government, all throughout. I mean, the fact that South Africa is sitting without electricity, where we get power cuts, you know, between 6 to 10 hours a day, every single day. It's a result of corruption. That's all it is. It's not a lack of resources. It's not a lack of skill. It's just corruption. And so I've seen a miraculous democracy fail within one generation. And that's sort of given me a very sobering perspective on the ability of human beings to govern, at a large scale. I think that's maybe why I'm so passionate about decentralized systems, because I think decentralization is the only way that people can live together. The more power you concentrate in a few hands, the more likely it is that power will corrupt people. And I've seen that very close to home.
Well, it's interesting you brought that up. I've been thinking recently about democracy and Bitcoin, how Bitcoin can actually influence democracy. Because you have countries already in Africa that are in dictatorship. So they're fighting to get out of dictatorship to get into democracy, whereas there's countries that are in democracy, and we feel like Kenya is supposed to be a democracy, I guess, and we're in a downward spiral. So how does Bitcoin come in terms of decentralization? Maybe you can show us. We talk about government making changes. How can Bitcoin make changes directly to people without depending on centralized government?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm very grateful for the democratic institutions in South Africa. I'm not saying that democracy is a complete and utter failure. I mean, I would rather live in a democratic South Africa than in a authoritarian communist China, for example. I would rather live in a South Africa that gives people the freedom of choice, where you can marry who you want, you can, you know, have a relationship with you, and rather than to live in a country. I mean, there are some African countries there where things like being gay is still illegal and punishable by death. I'm very grateful for the democratic institutions we have in South Africa, but it's clear that there's a long way to go. Democracy doesn't solve all our problems. Democracy is like a step in the right direction, but it's by far not, it's far from a perfect system. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever have a perfect system, but I think at the very least what Bitcoin can do is it can maybe just introduce a sense of accountability, you know. I mean, look, in South Africa, the government in South Africa is borrowing money at an alarming rate. So in South Africa, we have a very small tax base, and I'll just talk about the situation here because that's the only one I'm really intimately familiar with. But so we have a very small tax base in South Africa, a very small percentage of people paying most of the tax, and that tax base is shrinking. And the government has a very large obligation to the citizenry, with social benefits and free healthcare and free education. So government in South Africa is spending way more money than what they are generating through tax revenue. And they are borrowing to make up the difference. And that's the same story in many countries around the world. Very similar to what's going on in the US, except in the US, they're printing money. In South Africa, most of it is borrowed, I think. But if you introduce a money like Bitcoin, it just brings a sense of accountability into the equation. like you can only borrow so much if there's no one, if you don't have this money printer that is just keeps generating money, then you don't have that much ability to borrow. And so I think Bitcoin will just bring a little bit more, how can I put it? We should have a way to almost like force politicians to think a little bit more carefully about where they're spending money. South Africa's ruling political elite are in some cases building monuments that are costing millions of rands, while there's people that are starving on the street. And it's almost as if there is no accountability. There's not enough consideration for where the money is going to. And I think it's because there's no end to their ability to borrow. I think if there was a full stop somewhere, they would have to think more carefully about where they're borrowing, what are they borrowing for, and can they ever pay it back? And I think Bitcoin could do that. I mean, I don't know. I think so. I hope so.
Yeah. So one thing that's notable about South Africa is the income distribution. There's a really wide gap between the rich and the poor, and so in Kenya we're home to, I think, one of the largest slums in Africa, Kibera, and I've seen organizations come in, the government come in, trying to change the livelihood of people in the slums, but we're not addressing the root cause, which is the money. That's one thing I've seen, and I know like your Bitcoin Ekasi is in a township, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, maybe you could be able to like tell us the situation there. How is it in the day of a life of a person living in that township?
I mean, it's a very difficult circumstance to live under. I wouldn't know. I didn't grow up in a township. I've spent most of my adult life working in the township. So I go there on a daily basis. I interact with people who are from there. The coaches that I employ with Bitcoin Ekasi are all from the township. The organization that I run, and that I've been running this organization for more than a decade, and it's focused exclusively on a township. So I probably know more about the township than most privileged people in South Africa, but I will never know exactly what it's like to live there, because I've never lived there. I've only worked there, but that's very different. It's very different to go in, work there, come back to my normal house and live here. So, that's a very tough question, and I can only imagine that it's a very, very difficult circumstances to live under. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I have more experience with children from the township than most privileged people, because that's the job I do. So yeah, it's tough. And like you say, the root cause, I mean, what is the root cause? I don't know. From my perspective, I think the root cause really, I don't know what the root cause is, but I know what a potential solution is. And if I can put it this way, the shortcoming that I see in South Africa's townships, and something that really needs to be addressed, is this idea of taking responsibility for the situation that you're in. And it's a very difficult thing to try and teach a person, because it is a very difficult situation. And I mean, I feel quite comfortable to be teaching that and to be working with people and try and teach that lesson, because I come from the perspective of recovery from drug addiction. So I'm a recovering drug addict. So I know what it's like to be stuck in a completely fucked up situation that is totally shit, with you can't see a way out. You don't know how you're going to get out of the situation. And the only way out of that situation is to take responsibility, to take ownership of the situation and say, look, this situation is fucked up. It's unfair. It shouldn't be this way, but there's only one person that can change this, and that's me. I didn't cause this situation. The cause of this situation is in the past. That's the original cause. That's where it comes from. but I can't change my situation by going back to the past. I can only change my situation by taking ownership. And that's what we've been trying to teach since we started this organization back in 2010. And Bitcoin kind of like just sort of falls in line with that. It's Bitcoin has a very, very similar ethos to it. You know, you got to take ownership. And if you do take ownership, I think there is a way out of it. I don't think South Africa's government has the ability to solve this situation. I just don't see that happening. They're struggling to keep the lights on, literally. so it's hard to see that they'll step in and have some sort of a solution. I think people will have to take ownership and do whatever they can. And one thing that they can do is to save in Bitcoin. That's what we've been encouraging since day one.
So it's fantastic you're now bringing up that. So maybe I wanted you to take us through some of the projects you work on. I've been seeing you. I'm impressed you managed to recruit merchants even in the township. I think we're at a time where really the orange pillar person, but trying to get a merchant to accept Bitcoin, but you've managed to do that quite well at the township. So how do you do it? Maybe give us a few tips on how we can go about it.
I mean, so the approach I take is to work with people who actually live in the township, and I'm not the one onboarding the shops. What I do is I coach the coaches, and so we have a group of, so at the moment we have six or seven people working full time for the organization. The actual organization is called the Surfer Kids, and it's a group of coaches who teach young children how to surf, and it just keeps them off the streets. You know, it gets the kids out of trouble. It gives them positive role models. So those coaches, they live in the same township as the children, and that's been very important from the beginning, because I can't expect the children to learn anything if they can't identify with the coaches that are teaching them. So they got to be able to look at that coach and say, look, that coach comes from the same place that I come from. So if the coach can do this, then I can do it too. I won't be able to teach the children because I don't come from the same place they come from. They won't be able to identify with me. So the coaches are the ones from the very beginning. I focused on the coaches to try and get them to onboard the shops, because it's a very similar situation. If I had to go to one of these shops and start explaining about Bitcoin, they wouldn't be able to identify with me and listen as if I speak their language. But the coaches do speak their language. The coaches come from the same environment. The coaches have the same struggles. They have the same challenges, the same obstacles. So it is in fact the coaches that have onboarded all the shops. One of the coaches in particular who's been working for us the longest, his name is Lutando. He's Lutando SABTC on Twitter. So he's actually the one onboarding all the shops, and so my job really was to educate the coaches on Bitcoin, so to give them the tools that they can then take to the shops and say, okay, look, let's look at this, let's talk about that, and then they would come back from the shops and we would sit and strategize together, and we would say, okay, we can't get this guy on board, let's try a different approach, let's try this. So my focus has always been to work very closely with a group of coaches, but then to let the coaches go out in the community, and because then everyone is on the same level. If I go into the township community, it becomes a relationship of that, and that's because of South Africa's history. That's not something that we can get away from very quickly. It immediately becomes an imbalanced relationship if I go into the shop and I start trying to convince them. But if the coaches go in there, it's a very equal relationship. And so that's been our strategy, basically.
Passport is the Bitcoin hardware wallet you already know how to use. Gorgeous design, sleek interface. Passport makes it easier than ever to self-custody your Bitcoin. If you've ever been on the fence about taking your Bitcoin off exchanges, this one is for you. Several exchanges that offer Bitcoin have turned out to be bankrupt over the past year. If you leave your Bitcoin there, it may be gone forever. With Passport, it takes just a few minutes to set up and experience the peace of mind that comes with taking your Bitcoin off the exchange and into your own hands. So go to foundationdevices.com and use the code BitcoinLayer for $10 off of your Passport, or just click the link in the video description. Huge shout out to the sponsors of the Bitcoin Layer.
So have the merchants been able to convince their suppliers to also accept payments in Bitcoin?
No, not yet. The merchants are really big cash and carry stores. So to get them on board, we would need quite a bit of influence. But the merchants do trade amongst one another. So, you know, we have, for example, we have a barber shop on board, and the barber shop would do some of his grocery shoppings at one of the grocery stores we have on board. The grocery store would go to the car wash that we have on board, and the barber shop would go to a mechanic. So we have a car wash, a barber shop, we've got a mechanic, we have a couple of grocery stores, we have a little takeaway restaurant, and these are all very small corner stores in the township, and they do trade in between one another. But we haven't yet gotten any major sort of wholesale stores on board yet. That's a whole different ball game. I mean, there is the South African company Crypto Convert that have enabled Lightning payments at Pick n Pay. But Pick n Pay is a very large grocery chain, but it's not exactly. It's more a place where you would go grocery shopping. It's not really the kind of place where you would go to buy bulk supplies. But I mean, it will happen. You know, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time.
I've seen the video that went viral with the kids, I think, paying at Pick n Pay. That was really good. So, and I've had teachings that you teach them. I'm sure you take them through the whole Bitcoin course as it is, even with the philosophy behind it. That was really impressive. So, are there any challenges you've been undergoing? We can talk about volatility, especially since merchants are also accepting Bitcoin payments. How do you get to address this with the merchants, or even with the ones that you're paying?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of challenges. You know, yeah, I think the biggest challenge really is the complete and utter failure of the public education system in South Africa. So we are working with a lot of people who have a very, very, very low level of literacy. So reading and counting and calculating skills, there's a severe lack of that, and that makes it difficult, you know. That makes it really difficult. Lutando and the other coaches deal with that a lot of the time. So they would get phone calls at random times to come and help some of the shops. They can't figure out the numbers or whatever. So that's a big challenge. I mean, educating anyone on Bitcoin is difficult if there's not a basic level of literacy. So we do have an educational program that we are running. We use the Bitcoin Diploma, which is developed by My First Bitcoin in El Salvador. I mean, they recently announced that they are incorporating Bitcoin classes into the national curriculum in all public schools in El Salvador, which is incredible. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we use the same diploma course to try and educate the coaches and the shop owners. But it's a very, very slow process. I mean, with the children, you know, the education there is literally just teaching them how to make transactions. That's all they do for the, you know, from the age of 7 to whatever, 13. It's a very, very basic education where we basically give them a little bit of sats if they do well in their schoolwork and if they show up and they have their good attitude, and we basically teach them how to transact. From about 13 years onwards, we start teaching them a little bit more about Bitcoin. So we use the Bitcoin Diploma. And then the more senior guys and the shop owners, the coaches, there we try and introduce the Bitcoin Diploma. But you really need a basic level of literacy if you're going to learn how Bitcoin works. but I mean, education is the foundation of this whole project. We can't do it with it. It would be very irresponsible to do this if we did not put education first. Let me put it that way.
And how many can you say you deal with in the circular economy? How many people can you accounts have been impacted by the activities in the circular economy?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, I think it's a really important question. I think there are two really important questions, and that's the first one. So we have 7 people that work for the organization full time, and they earn 100% of their salaries in Bitcoin. So they work Monday to Friday or Tuesday to Saturday, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. These are people who they work as lifeguards, they work as surf coaches, they work as project leaders in the community, and then we have another 5 people that work part-time. These are mostly kids that are almost done with high school, so they would be in like grade 10, 11 or 12, about to finish high school. So they would go to school, come back from school, and then work after school Tuesday to Friday and then Saturday. And they also earn their entire salary in Bitcoin. So that's 11 people that are earning Bitcoin on a weekly basis, and they spend most of that Bitcoin at the shops in the township, spread out between about 15 shops. And those 15 shops have about, I would say on average there's about 2 business owners per shop, so that's 30 people. So if you count all the business owners plus all the coaches, it's about 40 people, between 40 and 50 people. And then we have a program where we paint the shacks of people who live in the township. And so we've painted some pretty cool logos. We painted recently we painted the Human Rights Foundation BTC Pay server. We're going to start painting more African logos. So we're working on two now, but I can't say yet what they are. And so the people who live in those shacks, we pay them in Bitcoin too. It's not a lot. It's like $3 a week, so it's very little. But there's about another 20 people. So all in all, it's between 50 and 60 people that are encountering Bitcoin, transacting with Bitcoin, saving in Bitcoin on a weekly basis, if not every day. So it's not large amounts, it's not massive amounts of money, but we try and spread it out as far as possible. And I think with the next bull run, there will be a lot more interest that comes in organically. So yeah, and I mean, I think the second question that's really important is the extent to which those sats flow in the local economy. So the idea obviously is to spend as Bitcoin without converting to fiat. And there it's a little bit more tricky to measure, because you can't keep a record of exactly what people are doing with their money. It's their money. So it's a little bit more difficult to measure. But in terms of the number of people, I would say it's anywhere between 40 and 60 people.
Okay. That's very impressive. So I recently saw that Bitcoin Ekasi will be organizing the conference of Bitcoin Ekasi. Got to meet you at the Africa Bitcoin Conference. That was really interesting. So maybe you can give us an overview on what can we expect when we come to South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not alone in doing this. The conference will actually be hosted by Machankura. So Machankura is the official host. I think the main reason, we as Bitcoin Ekasi can't actually host the conference because we're a non-profit, so we can't really trade we got to be careful because we don't want to lose our non-profit status. So we're hosting the conference together with Machankura, but officially Machankura is the host, and Kotatsu and myself, plus 2 more people from the Adopting Bitcoin brand in El Salvador, plus 1 person who's a local organizer. So the 5 of us are kind of working together. We are the main organizing committee, I would say. And then we've got a team of local volunteers who've jumped on board to help us organize. So all in all, there's at least 10 people working on this. And I don't do more than the rest of them. So, yeah, but hopefully we can pull it off. I think it's going to be an amazing experience. I think we have a unique perspective that we can offer to attendees in terms of a Bitcoin conference that's not quite the same as anything else that's out there. So, you know, we have this situation in South Africa where we essentially have the government retreating and sort of leaving a vacuum where, you know, the most obvious example that is very easy to understand is the electricity situation where, you know, 15 years ago, South Africa had a perfectly functional grid. We never had power cuts. We had a completely stable grid, enough electricity for everyone in the country. And now 15 years later, we cannot produce enough electricity to feed the country. And it's a massive shortfall. I mean, yesterday we had 9 hours of power cuts. The day before that, we had 10 hours of power cuts. I mean, that's almost half the day. And that's within a matter of 15 years, right? And the reason that's happened is because the infrastructure, the grid, the power stations, all that infrastructure has not been looked after. It's not been maintained, and it's not been developed. And the money that has been paid, both by consumers when they pay their electricity bills, but also by government subsidies, that money is being stolen through corruption. And so the government is sort of like falling apart under its own weight of just under its own corrupt weight. And people in South Africa have no choice but to come up with their own alternatives, you know, which is what we call parallel institutions. So institutions that exist in parallel to the government and actually fulfill the same function, but it's not run by government, it's run by private individuals. And so we want to see where that overlaps with Bitcoin, because the people that are building those institutions are going to need a form of money that is not corruptible. You know, it's all great that we're building parallel institutions, but if the money collapses, then what happens to all that effort? So we want to see where that overlap happens. We're inviting some of the biggest speakers in the parallel institution space, people that have done amazing things in terms of building out infrastructure where government has failed. And then we want to invite some cool Bitcoiners. We want to put everyone in a room and see what happens.
First, I like how Bitcoin can really intersect with a lot of things, and I'm sorry about the power shortages in South Africa. I really see them. I don't know if I will be able to survive with a 9 hour. We usually complain even when it's 3 hours, but oh well, we'll get it sorted out. So yeah, thank you so much, Hermann. Maybe I wanted to say, could you maybe tell our viewers where they can be able to reach you? I know also Bitcoin Ekasi ran on a donation only, and how has a donation only? So I'm guessing Bitcoin has also impacted your means of receiving donations back then when you were with the Townships to now this Bitcoin Ekasi.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons why I decided to do this is because I can see where the Surfer Kids has the right mission. We want to empower people, but if you incorporate Bitcoin to that, the mission just becomes global. And now all of a sudden we are not just one little small organization operating here on the southern tip of Africa that no one knows about. We're connected to a global network of people who all have more or less the same goal, which is the empowerment of everyday people. You know, so incorporating Bitcoin into the organization has made a massive difference. We have a much wider reach. We have a wider donor base. It's easier to donate because Bitcoin can be sent instantly anywhere in the world, almost at no cost. Small amounts can be sent as easily as large amounts. It's not necessary to send large amounts. Fundraising on Bitcoin is just so much easier. You don't have to worry so much about international restrictions on moving money when you want to reach out to a global audience. But I think most importantly is just that our mission now connects to people who are on the other side of the planet. And essentially we've aligned our mission to a much wider mission. We want to, I can have a very limited impact in this little small part of the world, but if I help to push forward Bitcoin adoption together with a whole bunch of other people, people like yourself, people all over the world, together we can have a much bigger impact and change something for the better. Whereas if I work on my own, I will have a very small impact on a small number of people, really. So it makes much more sense for me. My big goal going forward is to run Bitcoin Ekasi, but also to reach out to other non-profit organizations and to pitch this idea to them and to say, look, all the things that you're doing, maybe you're feeding homeless people, maybe you are helping veterans, maybe you are, battling against pollution and environmental destruction, maybe you are, I don't know, whatever your NGO, your NPO is doing, think about switching your organization to a Bitcoin standard. Because actually, if we change the money for the better, then a lot of the work that we do as non-profits actually become unnecessary in a world running on a Bitcoin standard. And that's what we want. I mean, the work that I'm doing with the non-profit, I want to see a world where the work that I do is not necessary. I do what I do because the world is not as good as it can be. The work I do needs to be done because there's a long way to go. And I think if we actually move non-profits and NGOs onto the Bitcoin standard, they will have a much bigger impact. I think, I refer to myself, but the work I was doing before is kind of like putting a plaster on the wound, whereas introducing a Bitcoin standard is kind of like healing the wound from within, if that makes any sense.
Looking forward to seeing everything that Bitcoin Ekasi accomplishes. I'm a huge fan of your work, and maybe you can tell us where can our viewers reach you?
I guess Twitter is the easiest place. We have a website, which is bitcoinekasi.com. On Twitter, the handle is @bitcoinekasi. We're also on Nostr. I check DMs on Twitter as often as I can. Otherwise, there's a contact form on the website where they can send us an email.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on the Bitcoin Layer, Hermann.
Cool. It's only a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Special thanks to River for sponsoring this channel. Purchase Bitcoin with no fees when you dollar cost average and know your assets are held in massive cold storage with 100% full reserves. Plus, River has built their own infrastructure so they don't rely on third-party custodians. There's a new standard in Bitcoin and River is setting it. Get started at River by visiting river.com TBL and receive $5 for free when you buy $100 in Bitcoin, or click the link in the video description.